Welcome to yet another episode of the NewSpace India podcast. This episode is on both video and audio, courtesy our friends from Unbounded. So today we have two guests with us, Tom and Sunil. This is a unique episode because it's the first time we have a foreigner trying to play in India, in that sense. So, just to begin the podcast, let's start with a brief round of introductions. So, Tom and Sunil, please just introduce yourself briefly.
Okay, so thank you, NP. As you know, I myself, I'm an entrepreneur based out of Berlin in Germany, and my company, Berlin Space Technologies, is focused on small satellites, so anything what you can imagine up to the size of a washing machine, maybe 100, 150 kilos. And we are serving diverse markets all over the world. And I think we met back in 2011 and we were discussing about the upcoming new space revolution. And what has become apparent is that instead of single satellite, you need many, many satellites. And so we're now into mass manufacturing, and we do that together with our partners here in India. And I think that's a good introduction for Sunil.
Yeah, thanks. So I lead the business development activities at Azista Aerospace. Traditionally, we've been working with the only customer in India, that is ISRO, and manufacturing RF and microwave subsystems for the geostationary programs. And most recently, we've even supplied our subsystems for the RISAT programs as well. So we wanted to do something different. I mean, we've seen the new space industry blossom outside of India, and then we wanted to be a part of something global, a global phenomena. And then through common friends, we reached out to BST, and then the joint venture is here now. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So, tell us a little bit more about Azista's role in this collaboration and how you plan to move things forward.
Right. So as you already know, BST brings in a good chunk of the technology. BST, part of the reason why this partnership works really well is the bus and subsystems come from BST, and they're vertically integrated in a way, and they've been purchasing their communication subsystems from vendors, and that is a substantial cost when you look at mass manufacturing and when you look at lead time management. So that's precisely what Azista has been doing for the past so many years, and the idea is that the two companies together are vertically integrated in such a way that we manufacture everything in-house except for the propulsion. And the role of Azista here is, we bring in our expertise, our existing manpower. We do have more than 15 former ISRO scientists working with our company already, and we have about 150 employees working already in Ahmedabad who have the culture in place already. I mean, we've already been working on high reliability electronics for such a long time. So doing the low Earth orbit COTS electronics wouldn't be a real difference in culture. In fact, we need to bring down the standards a little. So the mindset is already there.
We don't have to bring down the standards, we have to bring down the costs. So the standards will still
of course. No, I mean in the sense that, working
doing good works with less paperwork.
Yes, less paperwork. Yeah, we could put it that way. Yeah. So one part is bringing in the talent and manpower at affordable costs, and productionizing this whole the mass manufacturing of BST's technology. As a company, we've been the core capability we believe is manufacturing, regardless of what the technology is. So again, that requires a certain mindset, and we invest a majority of the investments into this joint venture. So Azista's role to conclude would probably be investment and bringing in the technology for the communication subsystems, and also the manpower, and the manufacturing part for scale up.
Yeah. So Tom, it's very clear what Sunil talked about, their capabilities and everything else. So for you, just talk about why you chose India, because as a German company, you can choose any emerging country in the world in that sense, and there's lots of them. And why did you choose India, and why this as a destination for your JV?
Well, actually, we didn't really look for whether it's emerging or non-emerging or whatever, right? We were looking for a very strong partner for the serial manufacturing, and we were looking for a place that had a number of qualifications. And I don't think emerging is the right name. We needed a space power already, right? So we need a place where we have a rocket, where we have very talented labor, and preferably English speaking, with a stable political system. And if you combine all these things, then well, the group is very small. I mean, there you might be the United States in there. Of course, you can still do things in Europe, but actually, the best place to go, really, in all these combinations, is very much India, and it is really more a question why other people are not doing that, and that might be because of prejudice or because of not knowing that things in India go so well. We at our university in Berlin always had very good relations with India. Multiple satellites from our university TU Berlin have been launched in India, and so the professors had always very good personal connections to ISRO, but also to the country itself. So it was always in our minds that India is a great place to go to, and when we were thinking where to collaborate, where to do that, then that was not so much. We didn't so much recognize India as an emerging, but basically as a big space actor which has all the right things in place, and we wanted to participate in that.
So when you talked about this JV and so on, so what are the specifics of this? What are the what is it that the JV wants to do?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we want to do is to basically address what we call the Henry Ford moment in space. Henry Ford moment in space means we're currently in a situation where essentially a number of companies worldwide, few space agencies, they build satellites, but they do that in a very, very small quantity. So, outside of this factory from OneWeb and outside of the factory of the SpaceX, you have maybe 50 to 100 satellites built every year from about 50 to 100 players. So most people, if you ask them how many satellites do you build, then they tell you, okay, I'll build 1 per year or 2 per year, right? Space agencies often do more, like ISRO does a few more, but typically industrial players, if they do 5 satellites a year, then they are a global leader, right? And so all the business models, all this what you would call new space would require many of those satellites, right? So, and of course it is then very important to increase the number, increase the production, because let's say if somebody like SpaceX requires 30,000 satellites, then of course he cannot wait until 50 companies produce every year 50 satellites. So there needs to be a change, and that needs to be addressed, and that is very similar to what happened to the automotive industry in the early 20th centuries, where there was a switch from cars being only accessible for the rich to cars being accessible for the great multitude. And I think similar things will happen for the space industry, and Azista and BST want to be participating, and we have joined forces to basically accomplish that.
So Sunil, if there's any high-end technology being manufactured in India, or especially in this sort of a setup, right, there may be a perception that India is just a low-cost destination, and it's just a sweatshop for outsourcing, the traditional mindset or a stereotype, right? What can you say about battling this kind of stereotype, and how does this affect the whole process as a business?
You mean about the fact? I mean about the opinion or the perception that?
Yeah, the idea is the real fact is that it goes beyond, because you have a manpower base that can produce reliability. It can produce reliability over many missions.
Right.
So that's a battle to overcome for many companies in India.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the perception that India is a sweatshop where you get everything cheap, not really right. I mean, I would say it doesn't come so easy. I mean, for instance, if I would have to compare China to India, the sort of supply chains that are already in place in China, the sort of ecosystem that is already built, that a company that is trying to do something in space could utilize. It's not easily available in India, in the sense that starting with the supply chain, I would say even the way the mindset for mass manufacturing. You do not have a lot of manufacturing happening in this country. I mean, people haven't utilized it. Sweatshop in the sense, probably in the IT sector, people probably were able to do a lot of good work, both in terms of creating value as well as utilizing India as a sweatshop. But when it comes to manufacturing as such, India hasn't done much. People haven't been able to crack the code when it comes to India, because if you look at the numbers, compare India to other Southeast Asian nations like Thailand or Malaysia, we were at a very similar, manufacturing contributed a very similar percentage of the economy, percentage to the economy in the 90s or 80s for all these three countries. But what happened in Thailand and Malaysia, the manufacturing as a share of GDP multiplied twice and thrice, which didn't happen in India. Manufacturing still contributes the same amount of revenues to the economy as it did 20 or 30 years ago. So I think there are a lot of challenges that need to be addressed if one has to utilize India and the manpower. Yes, there are a lot of positives out here, like people speak English and people are very good, very sound engineering capabilities are available, but not too many of them have very strong fundamentals as well. So there are certain challenges, but again, they could be overcome with strong training and on-the-job training in place. You would have to, my conclusion would be that you would have to put in some work, understand the needs of the manpower here, and then yes, you can definitely tap into their talent.
Yeah.
Maybe I can jump in. I think what you also addressed is the fact of how India is perceived from the outside. I mean, what Sunil says is very valid. How the ground realities are, but what I also get is that the perception sometimes is overly negative, and that is because a lot of people do not know, right? So I have that very often when they ask me, okay, you launch satellites, where did you launch them? And it's like, I launched them in India, and they're like, what? India has a rocket? And it's like, yes, they have very many rockets actually, and they're one of the big players in this domain. And that fact is unfortunately not yet known that widely. And I think NP, you're doing a great job to basically also educating a grander audience about India and its space capabilities. And I think that's very, very important. And it might be sometimes subtle, but it is always there. The questions: oh, you're now doing something in India? Are you really sure about that? Yeah. Wouldn't it be better to do that in Germany? Wouldn't it be better to do it in the United States? And then you can bring the right arguments, and of course, not everything is rosy, right? But I think you can make a substantial and good argument to do something here in India, and then maybe it is not all roses, but it's also perfectly not as it is generally seen by the outside world. And yes, that is sometimes a stiff wind that comes in your direction. But you have to basically bring your arguments, say, okay, these are the facts, this is what we can do, and then basically prove them wrong by doing, right? If somebody doesn't want to believe in you, okay, they won't. But if you can prove and if you can show, then of course you have a much better chance to convince people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at your culture of building satellites and your culture of having engineers work in certain ways and the culture of Indian engineers, is there a lot of difference when you try to build such a JV and you try to transfer knowledge between each other and build up processes which are quite maybe different or based on different standards, and how do you make sure that everything works in synergies?
That is a very difficult to answer question, but first I would jump in and say I wouldn't say there is such a thing as an Indian culture, right? So there's different company cultures, and I think the most important thing is to find the right partner. So as I said, we have been collaborating since 2011, and we probably know each other's dreams on changing the future of space very well. But you know that over the years we have talked with many people and trying to implement the vision that we have. And as you know, it is really not important where the person is coming from, but what are the core values of that person? What is the core values of that institution? And that is the big challenge. And that was the biggest change when we first when BST first met Azista. We were immediately aware this is the company that you want to work with, and that was not they are Indian and that's why I want to work with them. It's like, no, the culture of the company is very similar to our approach, and I think. Maybe Sunil can say something to that, but I think the sentiment was also that from the Indian side was immediately recognition they are doing things similar to what we are doing, and they're neither sloppy nor overly zealous in doing things. So there was a very nice synergy, and I think what people have to see is that there's not one India or one Israel or one whatever, but there is individual people, that make up individual institutions, and you need to find your partner and you need to be very, very specific about it, because otherwise if you're just, that doesn't really work much. But maybe Sunil.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with you totally. The first time I visited BST, and then interacted with Tom and his colleagues, I instantly knew that these are the guys I want to work with. So yeah, I mean, it did take some time to make it a reality, but I think the values that the two companies share, as Tom rightly said, it's not about two countries, it's about the companies and the way they work. So yeah, I mean, we've been working on more traditional space, and they are in the new space. I mean, until now, but. That's only a change, a slight change in, the way we approach this new project. I think that could be, we could sensitize the team, and that is definitely possible. But apart from that, the more important part is how we approach business, how we share common values, and what we want to do, how much do we both believe in a single vision for the joint venture. I think these are much more important, regardless of where we come from. Yeah, I think that's something where we both connect, where the two organizations connect really well.
So one of the most complex things in India is actually the whole supply chain management for space systems, because traditionally, if you look at any Indian company, there has not been a single Indian company that normally did an entire satellite by itself, because essentially nobody had the incentive there to invest in such money to build an entire satellite, to control all the IP for that as well. So when you are trying to do this JV, I am not sure how rigorously you can integrate the existing Indian supply chain into your company to keep costs low or keep production low or so on. So have you given a thought about all of this, or what is your approach?
Yeah. Well, we do very much what we do in Germany, right? Because you could ask this very question also in Germany, because in Germany you have the large system integrators like OHB and Airbus, and they have like a chain of suppliers, and they are very well fit to that specific end customer, which is DLR or ESA. So very similar to here, where you have Israel as the main customer, and then you have certain things that you have outsourced. When we came into being, this particular company of mine, the Berlin Space Technologies, when that came to be 10 years ago, our first realization was that a lot of the ecosystem would not fit us, because we would not predominantly want to do only government mission. We wanted to do commercial missions, and at that time in Germany, even when they were talking about commercial missions, that basically just meant selling something to some agency in some form or the other. So we built our own supply chain, meaning we have identified partners, not necessarily all from the space industry, but from various branches that were willing to learn what needs to be learned to do these things. And we have hired people, not necessarily from the space industry, but from other industries which had the skills, and have trained them over the last decade to do the things that we want to do. And by that, we had, as you said, we had a natural incentive to be as vertically integrated as possible, because the few remaining subsystems that we still built or still bought from third party in Berlin contributed sometimes more than 50% of the entire satellite cost in just being very few, right? And so as Sunil said, the big synergy with the Indian side, with Azista, is that they are contributing exactly the subsystems that we are missing. And they have for their things the supply chain already in place. And what do you need to have a supply chain? You need mechanical engineering, you need electrical engineering, you need software, and all of these things. And all of these things Azista had already solved. And so it's not like we're dropping outside in on the Mars or the Moon where there's nothing there, right? It is. We have a partner that's very strong, that has a very strong industrial base, that does already space systems in the communication that are known. So we just basically bring some extra, but we're using the same processes, and that I think is the secret, so to say, to make these things happen. Otherwise, of course, you have all these problems. So it's very important to find a good match between the two partners.
Okay, so what is the roadmap for your JV at the moment, and what are your plans briefly? I mean, I know that you cannot maybe disclose every little detail or any sensitive details about your plans, but whatever you could say broadly about, what are the probably things that are going to happen? Please.
Yeah. So of course the first thing to say is be surprised. But generally speaking, as you know, we have been working very actively on the satellite factory, which is in Ahmedabad. Very nice place, very nice combination of skill set and infrastructure and of course the people there. But I think the main message that for us to give is that we have started operating our factory. We are now able to produce and test hardware and satellite there. We are, of course, as you would imagine, not jumping in with the full capability of the factory in the first moment, but there's an initial capability there. We will build some prototypes. I can't disclose too much about those, but they'll come very soon. And those satellites, those prototype satellites, will be built, and we'll analyze exactly the things that you have mentioned. How does the production chain in India work, right? Do the processes that we have made out to work in Germany, do they still work here? What adaptation do we do? But also, what type of know-how we can take from the Indian side, because Sunil has mentioned the Azista is very strong in mass manufacturing for various different fields. So basically, how can we apply those things for us, and then move from basically the traditional maybe one satellite in 2 years to one satellite in 2 days, right? So these things need to be done, and will be done and are being done right now. But yeah, so our factory is the main big thing going on, and then from there, be surprised.
Yeah. So Sunil, one of the key things that I always think about when I talk about NewSpace in India is actually, the vision of creating more jobs and contributing to the economy in the wider extent. So, what do you think will be the roadmap for your company in terms of hiring more people or expanding? Because I think you
already like crazy.
Yeah, please.
no. So the whole idea is I'm excited about people getting to do some work in space in a new company setup where they'll have much more freedom to do things and criticize and to learn and more. So I wanted to know if there are opportunities that will come up in the near future for many more people to get into the space industry.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the other day we were at IAST and we were talking to a bunch of the undergrad and postgrad students. They were all very excited to know about the joint venture, and a lot of them even approached us, asking what opportunities lay ahead. I mean, IAST is just one case where you have a dedicated school, that produces students for the space industry, but notwithstanding that, I mean, I think students from across sectors, I mean, with mechanical as well as electrical engineering backgrounds, have opportunities. I mean, in fact, we do not expect students to have prior experience in space or working, in the space industry already. We would actually like people to come in with a clean slate, people who are, on which we could write the story of the JV. I mean, how the kind of mindset that is required to build systems for the joint venture. I think, I mean, the opportunities are definitely there, and the roadmap, I would say, I mean, for the joint venture as such, we would start hiring in probably, I would say, about 3 to 4 months' time from now, actively. But until then, Azista as a company in Ahmedabad, we have a team of 150 engineers and scientists, and a significant number of these people are people who do not have prior work experience. And we train them. I mean, ISRO scientists are a great asset to us because they have so much more to contribute after they retire from the, from their active role at ISRO. So, under the guidance of these scientists, the young generation are being trained at Azista.
Maybe Sunil, you should add the perspective, right? When Azista when Azista the Ahmedabad facility was started, it had far less people. Maybe you can mention already the trajectory that has been done for Azista, and not only the absolute number.
Right. Yeah. The Ahmedabad operations have been functional for about 2.5 years right now, and started with a team of about 25 people, and we've grown to a team of 150 today, and we continue to hire people. I mean, there are definitely opportunities. That too for people with strong fundamentals. What we look out for is not prior experience in space, but strong fundamentals, so that they could adapt to our requirements. Yeah.
So, Tom, you said there are these factories that are going to come up for satellites like automotive manufacturers. Of course, we know what happened to the thousands of automotive manufacturing factories that people wanted to build from all over the world. And today there are at least half a dozen of these manufacturing, mass manufacturing facilities that people are thinking about for space. What is your prediction as to what will be the number of mass manufacturing, facilities that people would envision, and at the end, where can it settle?
That is a very interesting question, NP. The answer is of course it depends on how will the market develop. It will also depend on how will the governments work, right? Because at the moment, the reason why we have so many individual companies doing so little is because, let's say, a German company would only work for the German government, or a French company would only work for the French government, and the same is true for the Chinese and the Americans. It's always like a local company that produces very few for that, and so of course with that it was very hard to generate useful numbers. This is now changing, but I think we'll find a balance in between. Every country wants to have their own national satellite manufacturer, and the fact that you need to have some consolidation to make satellite factories work, because otherwise, if there's no consolidation, if you had 50 satellite factories, you would have the capacity to build 50,000 satellites every year, and even the most crazy predictions do not see that, right? We're seeing maybe a need of like 1,000 to 5,000 satellites every year, and that would mean actually one factory could do that. However, I cannot imagine that the Americans would buy from a Chinese satellite factory, and I cannot imagine that the Chinese and even OneWeb or SpaceX. So I would say there will be more factories than would be factually required, but I don't think it will be 50, right? So my personal estimation is from the big factories we'll see about 3 to 5. My estimation is we'll have at least 2 in the United States, because they are throwing so much money on these constellations. We'll see at least 1 or 2 in China. You don't hear a lot about that, but if you know what you have to look for, they have these things under development. In Europe, you have the French factory that works together with Airbus that works together with OneWeb, and then you have to also have Thales that has also a little factory that could be tens but not hundreds of satellites. So there are multiple factories at the usual suspects, and I personally believe India is too large a market, too large a player in space to not have at least one of these institutions, and we want to be that institution. And of course, India has a big advantage over all the major other players, because India has a foreign policy that means that a very non-aggressive. There has always been a very focus on defense, and even if you have maybe disagreement with neighbors, it has always been the moderating end from, not the escalating end from the Indian side. And that means India is seen as a very stable and reliable partner in international relations, and that also could contribute to the fact that India is an accepted neutral player for satellite manufacturing. Somebody that might not want to buy from the United States nor want to buy from China might want to be in a position, or is in a position to buy from India, and I think that creates an opportunity for us here, and that's what we are following.
Yeah, awesome. So Sunil, the whole we are here at the Space Park Kerala event, and of course we see now a lot of new and upcoming new space companies in India, and a lot of them want to do data related applications. There's a lot of downstream activity that is happening here in India, where people are trying to develop applications that are direct to citizen or to direct to business or so on. Do you think at some point of time there will be a demand based on these companies being successful for you to then cater to that by building some of these satellites for them?
Right. Yeah, that's part of the the reason the joint venture is here in India. Unlike the other mass manufacturing facilities around the world, like the OneWeb or the one by SpaceX, which cater to a particular constellation, we are agnostic to any constellation. We have a bus, we have the subsystems in place, and we have capabilities to modify the designs as well, and maybe build a new satellite for a particularly demanding payload, right? So if a customer would want to focus on the service side of business, we would like to take up the role of manufacturing, and we believe that we could do it better than most because, again, of the scale and the sort of infrastructure we have in place. So yes, we see that at some point in future, once the market is a little more mature in India, when these downstream services actually come into play, I think we have a role to play to collaborate with some of these startups in India.
Do you also you said that you already work with ISRO quite significantly. Do you see a lot of roadmap where possibly the knowledge and the processes that you're acquiring through this JV will create some demand in ISRO, because ISRO is also now stepping into the small satellite realm, and there is they have plans for many of these constellations by themselves. At least I know that they were planning for at least the 10 satellite constellation with France, and a dedicated 10 satellite constellation for remote sensing and other things. So there's also the Defense Space Agency opening up, and that space opening up as well. So you're kind of getting into a space where you will have some heritage and some backing, and you would have created all the fundamentals around it for you to possibly serve these people. So maybe a good opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are very positive developments. ISRO as well as the Defense Space Agency, coming up with such projects in mind. But I think again, we would be very cautious to to understand that we are definitely going to get them. I mean, I think we would have to prove our capabilities. There has been a lot of talk by a lot of people in the country, and it's time someone actually stands up and shows what can be done. We would like to do and showcase to the potential customers both in India and abroad. I mean, and then prove our capabilities with the joint venture. Yeah.
I would like to add to that. I think here in India, but also everywhere, is seeing is believing, right? And one can talk. I can do this, I can do that, You can generate a lot of paper, and one of my professors says, in computer everything flies, The point is, you need to get feet on the ground and need to do something. And I think this is shared by all the stakeholders in India, right? So if you look at ISRO and the other people that you mentioned, of course they have reservations, because traditionally they have not seen anything like what we are proposing, and of course it's easy to propose, but it's very hard to implement. And I think that's why I say stay tuned, be surprised. That's why we put our foot down and say, okay, we are going to do things, and then if at some later point they say what you've done is great and we want to do something, and I think things will change after that. But until then, for an outsider, it's very hard to differentiate. Is that guy with a PowerPoint slide the guy that can do it, or is that guy with a PowerPoint slide that can do it, right? And I think you first need to do it before there's anything that is substantial. Yeah.
So, Tom, let's stay with you actually. So, one of the complexities in doing business in space is, of course, export control and managing red tape with governments and everything else. So, and space satellite technology, and especially the kind of imaging satellites that you traditionally build, are all very sensitive also. So how welcoming is the technology, allowing technology to kind of flow between countries like this when you compare India and Germany?
Oh, that is a very interesting question. So first, a disclaimer. My company, Berlin Space Technologies, and also Azista, is operating completely within the boundaries of the law and by the letter of the law. It is. I mean, if as soon as you start reading into any of those things that you have mentioned, you'll realize that you're with one foot or both. As soon as you start, you're halfway in jail, and you're always very much dependent on the goodwill of the lawmakers, because, as we have heard earlier today, the law is sometimes so confusing that even if you are in a goodwill and want to do anything right, that might not be possible, because there are mutually non-exclusive things in this law. So I think what we have been doing is very carefully talking to our respective governments and it's explaining, like many years back. I mean, if anybody would start today, even with good intentions, they would have like maybe 5 years of discussion in front of them. So not to discourage, but it's just to explain the ground realities, right? So you need to go to your own government. And coming to your question, how is the free flow of information and technology between nations when it comes to satellites? And the answer is there's none. There's no free flow, because satellite technology is dual-use technology, and so under the Wassenaar Agreement, which India is thankfully a partner, and thus shows that they are very respectful with these type of potentially military technologies, that means that all of these things are regulated, from the little tiny nuts and bolts to more complex things, right? And maybe some things that you might be able to do in a computer industry, if that same computer would have the application for space, it would be regulated and no free flow anymore. So I think the important thing there is to talk with your government early, to establish the case between the nations, and then it's very good that Germany and India have very good relations and respect each other as partners, and for a long time already want to do collaborations in space. But I could imagine that other countries would have a very hard time, and so stick with the rules and don't move an inch past out of that, and that will be a lot of paperwork, and it is a lot of paperwork, has been a lot of paperwork for us, but I can tell you it's manageable, it's doable, but takes a lot of time.
So Sunil, India is in the stage of having a draft space legislation, and
Yes.
we are still in the process of figuring out if some things will be changed in the draft and so on. As a running business and having to do joint venture and everything else, what are the key things that you look for in legislation, and that you think are the top priorities?
Whatever it is, we need clarity. Operating under ambiguity is not good for the business. So, I mean, that slows down everything. I mean, slows down decision making, slows down progress. So, of course, I mean, first thing is we are very thankful to all the people who are working on this, like you and then the others. It's a lot of, weight and a lot of uncertainty, until something comes out through this legislation. I mean, and it's a work in progress always, right? I mean, you don't get the perfect set of rules and laws in one shot. So, I mean, but we should definitely start at a point which is acceptable to the players as well as the government, and I think that is, we are moving in the right direction to get there. I hope it happens soon. But as a business entity, it's tough operating under such uncertainty. I mean, you can see that even for investors, I mean, it's big money, and it's to invest in such. It's a nascent industry, but at the same time, it's very uncertain, particularly in India. I mean, we have been sort of laggards when it comes to regulations across sectors, starting with telecommunication and so many others. But when we do it really well. I mean, our people are very smart. I mean, they come in and then they really play the game and take it forward. I mean, the airline industry and telecom industry are examples. So. I mean, I think it augurs well for the industry if an ecosystem can be, if the government plays the role of an enabler, I mean, rather than try to control everything. So, the sooner they do it, the better it is. But we already took the jump. So, we'll navigate through this.
That's something. I think in addition to the uncertainty which has to go away, clarity is always important. But once you have that in place, as a German perspective, we have lots of laws, and they're very, very straightforward in most cases. But there's always, a fine balance. One is the over-regulation, where you have the feeling, does the government not want anymore that business is being done? I mean, it's always a pendulum that goes back and forth, and the government together with the industry stakeholders has to find the right balance. But after the balance has been found, the important thing is that the processes are dynamic and fast, right? I mean, as a not so good example from what we are seeing in Germany, we have all this clarity, but then the processes are organized in a way that they take a lot of time. We Germans are very thorough, but I think we could do that thorough process in a way that it is faster, because other nations who have the same laws as in the European context do things much faster than Germany. And sometimes I'm sitting there, I'm like, if you don't want me to do that, then please tell it to me, but please don't take 2 years to decide it, right? And that is something that is very important, and I think that would be an important thing for India as well. Have the clarity, and then have a process that maybe with a turnaround time of 8 weeks can tell you whether what you are planning to do will be in favor or not, right? Because otherwise you have clarity in the law, but no clarity in the decision.
So my final question to you guys is, you as a German company and you as an Indian company have collaborated in this. Do you expect other European or Indian companies to build such models inspired by you guys?
Hopefully not. No. Of course, there will be others, but I think for anybody else that wants to go into that, they have to have very realistic expectations, and that's why I mentioned we have been talking about that since 2011, and it nevertheless took us until 2017 before we have found the right partner. I mean, you have so many building blocks, and sometimes you don't have all of them in the right place, and so what you can expect is several years of trying to find the right partner, unless you have already some Indian business and know already some people here. So finding the right partners is very essential for the success or non-success, and that's difficult. And then your own legislation in your own country will take you a few years as well, so start with that early. And so we'll see that. We'll see new people coming into India and after we have proven success, but I don't think that will happen overnight. I mean, they will look at what we are doing, and once we're successful, they might want to also do that, and then they will realize about all the mountains of stuff that are still in place. So I don't expect that we will have like 20, 30 or whatever. Maybe we have one or two more, but it will take a lot of effort. That's what I think.
So Sunil, just to add to that, you can just address the whole first mover advantage along with that point. If there is a first mover advantage, or does it matter at all, or?
No. So the first mover advantage, it goes like this. A bunch of people move in, and a number of them die, and then the one who lives is called the first mover. Okay. Exactly. So you'll realize soon if we are the first movers, are the ones who get sacrificed in this process. Yeah. So the first movers always have a lot to face. I mean, you don't have a smooth ride, right? So you got to have the patience and the strength to wade through all this. So let's see. I hope we end up being the first mover to take that advantage.
Yeah, and not just pave the road for the first mover yet to come.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I mean, thank you very much, guys, for participating. I hope to record a future episode in a few years to reflect back on probably this conversation. I think that will be really fantastic at a certain point of time. Yeah. And good luck to your joint venture. And I hope that this will lead to the whole NewSpace ecosystem in India building further. Tons of jobs getting created, and space as really being treated as a part of the economy rather than just as something that the state needs to do it. Right. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP. Thank you.
Thank you for staying until the end. If you have any comments or suggestions, please write to curator@newspaceindia.com. Please consider sharing this episode with any friends or family who may be interested in learning about India's space activities. If you would like to stay in touch with the NewSpace India community, please use the link in the description to join the NewSpace India Telegram group. Feel free to also suggest guests for any future episodes. A new episode of the NewSpace India podcast is released every other Friday. Do subscribe to the podcast using Apple, Google, or any other podcasting platforms you may use. Until the next episode, thank you.